She promised we could heal, but being close to her only made the wound deeper. The first time I saw her, I didn't know she would become an echo in my thoughts. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind where the world slows down just enough for moments to matter. I had wandered into that small, sunlit café near the river, looking for the kind of solitude only a corner table could offer. And there she was, seated across from the window, the late afternoon light brushing her face like it had been waiting for her all day. She was 40, but the way she carried herself made every subtle movement seem intentional, graceful. Confidence radiated from her in a quiet, unassuming way. Yet there was vulnerability tucked into the corners of her expression, something soft and fragile beneath the calm surface. She laughed at something her book said, a sound so warm it made me pause mid-sip of my coffee. My heart betrayed a flicker of something I hadn't expected, curiosity, maybe, or the first gentle tug of attraction. I noticed the small details immediately, the way her fingers traced the edge of the page, the subtle scent of jasmine in her hair, the tilt of her chin when she laughed. It was human and intimate, like watching someone in a private moment without intruding. For reasons I couldn't articulate, I felt both drawn to her and wary, as though the same presence that called to me could somehow hurt me if I got too close. When our eyes met, it was fleeting, almost accidental. I looked down immediately, pretending to check my phone, but the warmth of that glance lingered. There was a softness there, a recognition of my presence, but it was also distant, reserved, an invisible line drawn between us that both invited and warned. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected to feel this strongly about a stranger, yet even in that single shared second, something shifted. I found myself returning to that café, as if pulled by gravity. Each time, she was there, absorbed in her world, unaware of the storm she stirred in mine. Sometimes our hands brushed over a shared book or the sugar bowl. A fleeting contact, and yet it sent an unexpected shiver through me. I noticed the way she sipped her coffee, the slight pause when she glanced toward the door, almost as if waiting for someone, or maybe nothing at all. I didn't speak to her yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I watched quietly, learning the rhythm of her gestures, memorizing the way the sunlight caught in her hair. There was a tension that hummed beneath the ordinary, the unspoken possibility of something more, tangled with hesitation. Every glance felt like a conversation we weren't having yet, every shared smile a secret we hadn't acknowledged. That afternoon, I realized that I was not just observing her. I was beginning to care, carefully, cautiously, like stepping onto thin ice and feeling it give way just enough to make the risk irresistible. She was a wound and a promise at the same time, and I had no idea which I would encounter first. After those first stolen glances, our interactions began with the softest of steps. I never planned to speak to her, but some invisible pull seemed to guide me toward the table she often occupied. It started with casual words, comments about the book she was reading, the weather, or a simple remark about the café's music. At first, our conversations were tentative, polite, testing the boundaries of familiarity. Yet even in those ordinary exchanges, I sensed a quiet electricity humming beneath the surface, subtle but undeniable. She was warm, approachable, but not easily unraveled. Her words carried both experience and restraint, the kind of measured confidence only life and trials could teach. There was an elegance in how she leaned slightly forward when engaged, and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she cared for. I found myself hanging on every nuance, the rise and fall of her voice, the delicate brush of her hand as she adjusted her hair, the gentle tilt of her head that suggested curiosity, even amusement. At times, our hands would brush, passing her notebook across the table, or reaching simultaneously for the sugar jar. Each accidental touch sent a warmth through me, a fluttering reminder that the distance between us was more felt than measured. It was in those moments that I realized how intensely aware I had become of her presence, how easily my attention latched onto her smallest gestures. Yet unease lingered. I was constantly aware of the boundaries, the age gap, the life experiences that separated us, the silent question of whether this connection was meant to be or simply a fleeting fascination. Every time I considered crossing that line, I hesitated, my mind cycling through warnings and what-ifs. She, too, seemed cautious, her openness tempered by an unspoken history. Her smiles often carried a hint of hesitation, her laughter a brief, guarded melody that hinted at walls built long before I had arrived. Still, the tension was magnetic. Conversations that might have been ordinary felt charged, layered with unspoken meaning. I caught myself noticing the subtle details, the softness in her voice when she laughed, the way she cradled her cup with both hands, the slight furrow of her brow when she listened intently. These small observations became markers in my growing awareness of her presence, clues that slowly unraveled the curiosity tugging at my chest. By the end of each meeting, there was a shared rhythm, an unspoken understanding that we were both navigating something fragile. We left the café with a lingering sense of anticipation, a quiet question suspended between us: what was this connection, and how far could it go? I walked away thinking about the warmth of her gaze, the weight of her subtle touches, and the gentle, unintentional intimacy that had begun to grow without either of us fully acknowledging it. I was drawn to her, undeniably, yet cautious. She was a puzzle I wanted to solve, a story I wanted to understand, but one I approached with careful reverence. In those uneasy conversations, the slow burn had begun, quiet, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. That it was on a rainy afternoon when the walls between us began to feel less like barriers and more like fragile curtains, shifting with the slightest breeze. The café was quieter than usual, the soft patter of rain against the windows a soothing, almost hypnotic backdrop. She was sitting across from me, her eyes distant at first, tracing the rhythm of raindrops racing down the glass. But then, unexpectedly, she spoke, not about the trivialities of the day, not about the books we'd been sharing, but about herself, and the moments in her life that had left marks deeper than anyone could see. She spoke of a love that had ended quietly, of mistakes that had left echoes still lingering, of loneliness disguised behind carefully curated strength. Her voice was calm, even, but every word carried the weight of experience. I listened, leaning forward slightly, letting the silence between her sentences hold space for the meaning of what she was sharing. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands as she sipped her coffee, the way her shoulders seemed to ease and then tighten again as memories surfaced. It was an unusual intimacy, speaking of pain to someone who had barely entered your life, yet there was trust in the way she spoke. And I, too, felt vulnerable in response, unguarded in ways that surprised me. My hands rested lightly on the table, near hers but not touching, aware that the smallest gesture could communicate understanding or intrusion. I wanted to reach out, to reassure her, but also to respect the invisible boundary she had drawn. The moment was quiet, almost suspended in time. I realized that I had begun to care about her not just for her confidence, her poise, or the graceful way she carried herself, but for the vulnerability she rarely allowed the world to see. There was a magnetism in her honesty, a beauty in the careful way she exposed her softest corners. And in that, I recognized something about myself, how deeply I could be affected by another's quiet openness. I noticed everything, the faint sigh that escaped her lips when recounting a painful memory, the way her eyes shimmered with unshed emotion, the slight tremor in her voice when she laughed through the pain. I felt the urge to reach across the table, to touch her hand and silently say, "I see you. I'm here." But I held back, respecting the fragile space between us, letting the connection exist in the shared attention, the mutual acknowledgement of our humanity. By the time the rain eased and the café grew warmer with afternoon light, I felt a new closeness between us. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, only the subtle understanding that we had crossed a threshold. She had allowed me a glimpse of the woman beneath the strength and confidence, and in return, I had shown her my attentive presence, my willingness to witness her story without judgment. As we parted that day, there was a quiet shift in the air. The connection was deeper now, tethered not by words alone but by shared vulnerability and the slow, careful intimacy that was beginning to define us. And as I walked away, the echo of her confession followed me, leaving a soft ache and an undeniable pull, the sense that our lives were beginning to intertwine in ways neither of us fully understood. Why now, our interactions carried a rhythm that neither of us could ignore. It wasn't just casual conversation anymore, it was a delicate dance of proximity, glances, and pauses, a language that existed between words, in the spaces we left for each other. The café, once just a backdrop, had become a stage where every gesture felt amplified. Every smile, every tilt of the head, even the brush of an arm against mine, carried a weight I couldn't articulate. She said, softly, almost to herself, "We can heal." The words lingered in the air, tender but heavy with implication. I wanted to respond honestly, to speak the truth that had lodged itself stubbornly in my chest: "You're the wound." Yet I held my tongue, letting the silence carry what words could not. There was an unspoken understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of the danger and the pull that existed between us. Our hands met occasionally, by accident or design, fingers brushing over a shared notebook, touching as we reached for the same sugar packet. Each contact was electric, subtle but undeniable, and it left me acutely aware of her presence. The warmth of her hand, even in fleeting contact, lingered like an imprint. I caught myself studying her movements, the way her hair fell just so when she leaned forward, the way her eyes held a glimmer of amusement or curiosity that I had never noticed in anyone else. There was an intimacy in those moments, though we hadn't crossed the line into overt affection. A tilt of her shoulder toward mine, a gentle laugh that seemed meant only for me, a fleeting touch on my forearm, these were gestures heavy with meaning, gestures that spoke louder than words. And yet, the caution in both of us created a tension that was almost tangible, thick in the space between us, charged with possibility. I became acutely aware of the things she didn't say, the hesitation before she asked a question, the brief pause when her gaze lingered on me. There was a vulnerability there, yes, but also a deliberate restraint. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and yet she measured the distance carefully, as if testing the ground before stepping forward. And I, equally aware of the stakes, found myself walking the line between desire and restraint, captivated by the magnetism of her presence. Even in ordinary moments, there was a quiet yearning. Sitting across from her, our knees brushing beneath the table, I felt a pull that was almost unbearable. A shared silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words, promises, and fears. I wanted to close the distance, to let my hand rest gently on hers, to let her know that I was here, fully present, without expectation or judgment. But I didn't. I waited, knowing that the beauty of this slow burn lay in the tension, the careful pacing, the anticipation that made each connection feel profound. By the time we parted that day, the unspoken desire had deepened into a quiet ache, a longing that neither of us could name aloud, but that both of us understood. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every lingering moment of eye contact had built a bridge between us, tenuous yet undeniable. And as I walked away, I realized that desire wasn't just physical, it was emotional, intangible, and far more intoxicating for its restraint. The moment came quietly, without fanfare, on a late evening when the world outside seemed to pause. We found ourselves walking together along a narrow, dimly lit street after leaving the café, the cool night air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked pavement and faint jasmine lingering from her hair. Until that night, our connection had been built on glances, fleeting touches, and gentle conversations. But now, the unspoken tension between us demanded articulation. "I can't. I don't know if I should be this close to you," I admitted, my voice low, almost swallowed by the night. The words felt raw, heavier than I had imagined. She turned to me slowly, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the street lamp, calm yet searching, as if waiting for me to finish. Her presence was steady, a paradox of strength and vulnerability that drew me in while simultaneously warning me to proceed carefully. "You don't have to decide right now," she said softly, her tone gentle but firm. "We can heal, yes, but it's complicated. You have to know what you're stepping into." I stopped walking, and we faced each other. There was no dramatic flair, no grandiose gestures, only two people standing close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. I wanted to reach out, to touch her arm, to reassure her with a gesture that spoke louder than words. Finally, I did, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. The warmth of her skin under my palm was grounding, a quiet anchor amidst the swirl of emotions. "I care about you," I confessed, the admission both terrifying and liberating. But I can't stop thinking, that being close to you might hurt me. That, you might hurt me. My words trembled slightly, betraying the fear I had tried so hard to mask. She inhaled slowly, as if weighing the weight of my honesty. Then, softly, I've been hurt too. And yes, I'm broken in ways you can't fix. But I've also learned that letting someone in is the only way to heal. Her voice carried a vulnerability that was rare, yet resolute, a mix that made the tension between us feel almost sacred. For a moment, we simply stood there, the street around us muted by the gravity of the conversation. Our hands hovered near each other, fingertips brushing occasionally, each contact sending a subtle shiver through both of us. I could see her hesitation mirrored in my own reflection, the fear of intimacy tangled with the undeniable pull of closeness. Finally, I nodded, not because I had resolved the fear entirely, but because I recognized the courage it took to be present, for both of us. We didn't need immediate answers, and we didn't need to erase the uncertainty. The act of standing there, sharing the truth of our emotions, created a bridge, fragile yet meaningful. As we resumed walking, side by side, a new awareness settled over us, a quiet acknowledgement of the risk and the possibility, the tension between desire and caution. That night, I realized that emotional confrontation was not about winning or losing, but about honesty, trust, and the slow, deliberate choice to remain open despite the fear of being hurt. The evening was quiet, almost reverent, as if the world itself had stepped back to give space for what was happening between us. We found ourselves at the edge of the river walk, the gentle ripple of water reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and her perfume, subtle jasmine, warm and grounding. It was the kind of setting that demanded honesty, the kind that magnified every heartbeat, every fleeting glance. We walked in silence for a few moments, close but not touching. And then, almost instinctively, we slowed until our pace matched. The distance between us felt both too vast and impossibly small. Finally, I stopped, turning to face her. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the lamplight, held the same vulnerability and quiet strength I had come to recognize. I wanted to speak, to explain everything, yet words seemed insufficient. Instead, I took her hand gently in mine. The warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers against mine, was grounding and electrifying at once. I could feel her hesitation, the same careful restraint I had learned to navigate, but also a flicker of courage that mirrored my own. That single touch carried everything we had been building, the curiosity, the longing, the fear, and the undeniable pull of closeness. I don't know what the future holds, I admitted softly, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my chest. But I know I want to be here, with you, right now. Her hand tightened slightly around mine, an unspoken affirmation. She stepped closer, and the space between us felt charged, alive with emotion. The moment wasn't about declarations or promises. It was about presence, the quiet intensity of simply being together, acknowledging the bond that had grown in small, patient increments over weeks of fleeting glances, shared smiles, and hesitant touches. She leaned in slightly, just enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath, the gentle curve of her shoulder brushing against mine. I reached up instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face, letting my fingertips linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary. She didn't move away. Instead, she tilted her head, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. The world seemed to shrink to just us, two people suspended in a fragile, beautiful intimacy. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic confession, just a lingering hug, our arms wrapped carefully around each other, a safe space of quiet reassurance. I rested my cheek near hers, feeling the steady rhythm of her breath, the subtle warmth of her body, and the sense that this connection was real, unbreakable for the moment at least. And in that silence, that careful embrace, everything crystallized. The fear, the uncertainty, the hesitation, all of it melted into the simple, undeniable truth that we had chosen each other, even if only for this moment. The river whispered beside us, the night held us, and the slow burn of what had begun so subtly had reached its peak, a moment of truth, delicate and permanent, that would shape everything to come, the following days were quieter, not because the connection between us had faded, but because it had transformed. The tension, once sharp and urgent, had softened into a gentle warmth, a shared understanding that existed without constant articulation. Every glance, every subtle gesture, now carried the weight of what we had discovered together, that intimacy could exist in silence, that desire could be tempered by respect, and that trust, once earned, was a delicate treasure. We returned to the café, the familiar hum of conversation and clinking cups providing a comforting backdrop. She sat across from me, her posture relaxed, her eyes reflecting the calm confidence I had come to adore. I noticed the way she reached for her cup, fingers brushing mine briefly, not accidental this time, but deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared. I smiled, feeling a surge of affection that was neither rushed nor desperate, but patient and steady. Our conversation flowed easily, unburdened by the weight of unspoken fears that had once dominated our interactions. She spoke about her work, her small victories, and quiet frustrations, and I listened, fully present, aware that every word, every pause, was a thread weaving us closer. When I spoke, I noticed her attentiveness, the subtle nods, the brief smiles, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. There was a sense of equilibrium now, a rhythm that neither of us wanted to disturb. Later, as we walked along the river, the evening light casting golden reflections on the water, we reached a quiet spot where the world seemed to narrow around us. Without thinking, I reached for her hand, entwining my fingers with hers. The warmth, the weight, and the subtle pressure of her grasp said more than words ever could. She squeezed my hand gently, leaning slightly into my shoulder. The gesture was intimate yet measured, romantic yet safe, a perfect reflection of the journey we had taken together. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of the water. She smiled softly, tilting her head to meet my gaze. "Neither do I," she said. "But right now, this is enough." In that moment, I realized that resolution wasn't about certainty or promises of an easy future. It was about acceptance, of each other's pasts, imperfections, and the quiet vulnerabilities that had drawn us together. It was about choosing to be present, to acknowledge the connection we had nurtured with patience and care, and to savor the simple, profound intimacy of being seen and understood. We stayed there for a while, hands clasped, shoulders brushing, sharing a silence filled with understanding and quiet affection. There were no dramatic declarations, no rushed conclusions, only the slow, deliberate acknowledgement that our lives had intersected in a way that mattered, that lingered, and that would continue to shape us in ways we couldn't yet predict. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with muted shades of orange and pink, I felt an undeniable sense of peace. The wound, the fear, the uncertainty, all had found their place beside the quiet promise of connection. Whatever came next, we had each other, fully present, and that was enough.